So we are looking at macros today. We're going to be looking at macros from a pretty basic standpoint in terms of recommendations. Like I'm not going to get in too much into like how to calculate your macros. That's actually going to be in 2 days' time. We'll get into that. But we do want to talk about like good recommendations. Like what are our favorite sources of these macronutrients? Like what are our favorite types of carbs, sources of protein, types of fat, things like that. So because macros are a very, very large conversation, we got a lot to get through. So carbohydrates, very, very important. They play a critical role in a healthy diet, and they are also very good at optimizing performance. So here's how I always like to think about it when I'm talking to someone about like, being on like a low carb, high fat or high protein diet, right? A good source, like you want to think of carbohydrates as like a tool to be used, right? If you need lots of high intensity explosive energy, carbohydrates are a really good source of that because they break down into glucose, and glucose provides the energy for glycolysis. And we know glycolysis is our high intensity, short duration, yes, but explosive style of like energy production, right? So if that's the type of energy you want, then carbohydrates are a really good tool to use that. If you are more living like a sort of a gentler, more sustainable, like, we only spend so much time in the gym, right? And most of your other time is kind of spent just like living a kind of standard life of, I'm not sprinting, to my car when it's time to leave to go get lunch or something. You know what I mean? Like I walk, right? We all walk, we all kind of like, we sit for a lot of our jobs and, stuff like that. And so that's all very low intensity. So do you need to fuel up on carbohydrates for things like that? Probably not. So, is there is there room for like low carb diets out there? Absolutely, but they can be a really good tool to be used like before heavy, intense activity. They also are a great source of vitamins and minerals. And because that is something that we definitely want to get in our diet, they play an essential role in our health, right? We need those vitamins and minerals in order to operate. So sufficient carbohydrate intake in general is going to be important for recovery from exercise. If you are exercising intensely every day, playing a lot of sports and things like that, then it's actually pretty important to make sure that you are getting carbohydrates before physical activity because that helps with glycolysis, but it's also very important to get enough carbohydrates after physical activity in order to restore your glycogen so that you have, energy throughout the rest of the day. And maybe it's even going to help with tomorrow's workout. So it's always important to also refuel your carbs post workout if that is the type of diet you're on. It helps you maintain those carbohydrate stores. So what are carbohydrates? Again, they are organic molecules, right? They've got a carbon atom at the center, which is attached to an oxygen molecule and a little bit of hydrogen, right? So we've got carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen all making up our carbohydrates, right? And they're going to come in two varieties. We're going to call them either simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates. So simple carbohydrates is another name for saying like simple sugars, right? And so we're going to see these listed as either monosaccharides, which is the individual sugar molecules that we are breaking down, or disaccharides, which is two simple sugars linked together. So if we look at our examples here of our simple carbohydrates, we're going to have glucose, we're going to have fructose, and we're going to have galactose, right? Now, if you take two glucose molecules and link them together, actually, you know what I can do? Let's copy slide here. Is that going to work? Yeah, it does. All right, love that. So if you take two, oh, that is super pixelated. All right, hold on. Let's not do that. Let's just go down here and go like that because that's going to copy a lot better. So if we take two like glucose molecules, right? We take a glucose plus a glucose, right? That is how we end up with maltose, okay? And then you're going to hear a lot of when we're talking about carbohydrates, we're going to hear the word OS a lot. That means that we're pretty much talking about like sugar territory. So glucose plus glucose is going to give us maltose, okay? So we're going to see that right here. And then we have got other ones. We've got glucose plus fructose. So glucose plus fructose. Fructose is what you're going to find in fruits, right? So glucose and then plus fructose here, like we would find in like, let's say like a strawberry or an apple or something like that, right? That's how we are going to get sucrose. And sucrose you're probably pretty familiar with because that is your classic table sugar. So like when you see like white sugar, that classic stuff that you would put in tea and coffee and things like that, that is a little bit of glucose and fructose. Not exactly the most complicated thing in the world. And then if we take glucose and we attach that to galactose, that is how we end up getting, I'm trying to drag these all down here. That is how we end up with lactose. So lactose and maltose are both actually going to be found in milk. Maltose doesn't cause too many problems. You know, honestly, like maltose isn't going to really hurt you. But if you're out there listening to this and you are one of the most people on the planet who are lactose intolerant, basically what you lack is the enzyme necessary to break this double sugar molecule apart. So that's like what lactose intolerance is. There is an enzyme that some people have sort of evolved, that's so annoying, to have, right? Which is, it's called lactase. That's the enzyme that basically breaks glucose and galactose apart. And that way, like, you know, you don't have lactose, right? Like you break these two molecules apart. So glucose plus glucose, that's going to be maltose. Glucose plus fructose is going to be sucrose. Glucose plus galactose is lactose, right? So lactose intolerance, you have a really hard time breaking these up, which you kind of want to just avoid it. Or you can take Lactaid, which is this like enzyme that they can sell. It's over the counter. It'll help you kind of deal with that. So those are our mono and disaccharides, right? And that's how we ended up with like this list right here. Now there is also like oligosaccharides. These are slightly more complicated. I mentioned them yesterday, but it falls like, this is very stupid and I completely disagree with it. They're putting this like under the complex carbohydrates because it's technically more complex because it reached 3, and we used to call anything above 2 complex back in the day. And so like because of tradition, it kind of has this like stupid classification where it falls under the complex. It should 100% be over here. 100%, right? It's actually why I didn't put it in the notes here. So maltodextrin, which you're going to find in like cereals and stuff, high fructose corn syrup and regular corn syrup are technically oligosaccharides, which is like anywhere from 3 to 10, but they're still very, very simple, and they act in the body exactly like simple carbohydrates. So they're processed very quickly. What's the deal with simple carbohydrates? Why is that? You know, that's kind of what I end up talking about the most time is our bad examples of carbs, right? What do I mean by that, right? Well, the reason I say that like simple carbohydrates are quote unquote bad, I don't really like using the term bad when it comes to nutrition, so I like to put it in quotes here. But the reason I would say it's they're not as good as like other sources of carbohydrates is because they're just absorbed very, very quickly. And that can kind of be problematic for us, right? That can be a little bit problematic because if something is absorbed really quickly, your body doesn't really have to put any effort, doesn't have to expend any energy processing it, right? And so because it doesn't take any energy to process, it basically is just instantly in your bloodstream, right? And the reason that's so problematic is because that is what raises our blood sugar really rapidly. Now your body in general, you guys all know this, is constantly trying to maintain like homeostasis, right? It's always trying to maintain sort of a level playing field, right? And so when your body experiences like rapid anything, it usually works to combat that, right? And so how is it going to work to combat like super elevated blood sugar, well, it is going to release a lot of a hormone that will, fix that blood sugar level, right? In our example here, that is, in our case, that is going to be insulin, right? So when your blood sugar spikes really rapidly, your body has a really intense insulin response in order to drive that blood sugar level back down to normal. So think of it like this, right? Picture like two lines, you know, one here and another one here, right? So this is the blood sugar level that your body likes to kind of be at baseline, okay? So like ideally, this is where your blood sugar levels are. So let's say on a normal day, like somebody who's controlling their blood sugar like pretty well, it might look something kind of like this. Their blood sugar goes up, it hits this line, so their body goes, oh, let's release some insulin, right? And so then like that's going to drive it down. It's been a little while since they've eaten, and then all of a sudden their blood sugar's below the line, and everybody's like, oh, we should probably eat something, right? And then that's going to raise their blood sugar levels back up, right? So here, right, this is where we're going to release insulin. Keep getting cut off. I can't say here's some words. Maybe it's probably your connection, Freddie. I don't think it would be your laptop. It's probably just like a bad connection. I'll speak a little more slowly. But this is, insulin release, right? That's like where we trigger the release of insulin because our blood sugar levels got too high, right? And then here, this is sort of the opposite. This is going to be our sort of hunger trigger, right? All right, we'll go ahead and put that. It's not hunger trigger is not exactly like an actual medical term or anything like that. But that's kind of what this looks like, right? Your blood sugar levels get too low, and your body will then tell you to eat. If your blood sugar levels get too high, your body will, release insulin, and that insulin will hopefully drive the sugar into your glycogen stores. But if your glycogen stores are already full, then it'll convert that sugar into fat and store the energy that way. Because again, carbohydrates and fat are the same ingredients. Your body just converts the sugar into triglycerides and stores those triglycerides in a fat cell, right? So now if we look at like what happens with somebody who's like diabetic, right? The line is kind of the same, right? It's the same sort of shape here. Oops. Try to make sure they're actually around the same width. So it looks something kind of like that, right? But what's going to happen here is they tend to maybe like overeat. And so if they eat too much or if they eat like a really high sugar food, well, then the line comes up way faster, right? And because the reason this comes up slowly is because you got to remember, you're using all of this sugar along the way to metabolize it for energy, right? But here, so much sugar came in so rapidly, you only metabolized maybe a little bit as it was in there, but then the rest of it, you just got way above this line, right? That's overeating, or it's eating like a really high sugar food. So then what ends up happening is it spikes way above the line, which makes your body go, oh, holy crap, we need a lot of insulin, right? And so then your body kind of overproduces insulin. And what does that do? Well, very rapidly affects this, which drives your blood sugar down, and it crashes like crazy because there's so much insulin released in your blood, right? So then that causes you to plummet below the line, which usually then triggers hunger, right? And so then we end up overeating again, and that spikes like crazy. And you can see I'm just never staying in between the lines here, right? I'm all over the place. So again, this is going to be an insulin release. And it's probably going to be a pretty darn intense one because of how far we kind of came up above the line here, right? And then over here, we're having a really quite intense hunger trigger, right? So that's causing us to sort of oftentimes overeat, And so because we overeat, then our blood sugar is really high again, and we're just having real trouble here, right? So this is sort of what it looks like in a diabetic type 2 particularly. in a type 2 diabetics like blood sugar levels, right? Whereas here we're seeing sort of a normal, blood sugar, right? Like let's say this is between like, what this chart would actually sort of look like in real life is like this would probably be, let's say, 12 o'clock, right? Um, so let's say this is, 12 o'clock p.m. And then maybe this over here is like 4 o'clock, Whereas like over here, it's the same thing. Like this is 12 o'clock, right? And then this is also 4 o'clock. But you can see like this person was probably having trouble like controlling their hunger levels, right? And I maybe 3 spikes is a little bit too much for my little diagram here, but like, they would have like a big spike and a big, kind of plummet there. So really the healthy versions of carbohydrates are really just making sure that you're eating the complicated ones that take time to break down. So how do we slow how quickly that sugar enters our body? Well, instead we consume more complex carbs, right? We go for our polysaccharides, our complex carbohydrates. Lots of very complicated versions here, right? So the big ones we're going to see are starches. So there are a lot of different ones out there, and I don't know much about cooking, but there are like different examples of starches. You can actually see here. I think this is hopefully a list of them. Um, no, that's not good for. Those are just called potatoes. That's not helping me. uh, uh, Pectin versus amylopectin, stuff like that. That's what I'm looking for. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. No, that's still not it. I was hoping for a chart of different examples of starches. Whatever. Um, there we go. There we go. So we've got some different versions of like amylose, pectin, amylopectin, right? Similar to how we were talking about like we had this ose, that ose, put them together to get this ose, like it's very similar to like, what they look like. But you can see these are the different shapes of these big polysaccharides, right? Polysaccharides being complex carbohydrates. So that's one of the reasons why you have a difference between like a waxy potato. Let's see here. Waxy potato versus like a dry potato. Um, right. And so like the difference between them is that like they have different forms of starches, right? You have starchy potatoes, waxy potatoes, and I guess all purpose potatoes here. And then like rice is different, and different types of grains out there. There's a lot of different forms of starch, but if we look at like starches, we're gonna see a big list of lots of things, right? You're gonna see green bananas. I guess actually I guess that's actually not untrue. Bananas that haven't like broken down into their sugars yet are actually very starchy. So why I don't like them as much. But like beans are definitely a starch, brown rice, lentils, cereal, oats, and then obviously like potatoes, right? Like lots and lots of different examples of starches out there, which are these big, longer chains of sugars, right? Linked together in various different forms. Now, we can also store carbohydrates in our body, right? Again, that's our glycogen, right? And there's a slight difference in there. If we look at like starches versus glycogen, if you look at like kind of the structure here, glycogen has a lot of water in it. It actually stores a lot of water. And you can actually tell that because it just has a lot more branches on it. Like amylose, it's kind of this big, long, straight line. This would be a very starchy potato. Okay. So like this would be a very, very, very starchy food. Something's kind of dry if you don't like, it doesn't absorb like a lot of water, right? Like brown rice, for instance, always tastes a little drier than like white rice, which absorbs more like moisture, right? So like you're gonna find more things like amylose and like a starchy potato, like like a russet potato, the brown ones. And then like your waxy potatoes are going to probably be more like a red potato. They tend to hold a little bit more moisture in them, right? So a russet makes a really good baked potato, and red potatoes make really good like mashed potatoes, or so the Irish guy thinks. But you can see the reason this one is a little bit drier is because you can stack amylos. Like it'd be very easy to stack another one like right here. They got a little like wave to them, so they're not going to stack perfectly, but they still stack pretty well. This amylopectin, a little bit less. Like obviously you can see here, right? This isn't gonna. There's gonna be some gaps. When I tried to stack two of these chains together, there'd be some space. Well, look at glycogen. It's got such a like funky kind of spread out, sort of structure here. This is all just glucose molecules all linked together. But you can see there's going to be a lot of water in this one because it doesn't stack very efficiently. If you look at like the states of matter, this is back in old high school biology, right? We're not going to worry about plasma. Ignore this one on the end. But you can see like a solid is efficiently stacked, a liquid is less efficiently stacked, and a gas is kind of not stacked at all. There's like too much space between the molecules, right? So lack of space, lots of space, lots and lots and lots and lots of space, right? That's kind of like how solids work. So this would be a little bit more solid. Now there is one really solid one here. I mean, look at this. You can see like cellulose, and I love how they drew this. Now that I'm looking at it, because you can see like fiber is not only like big straight lines, but they're also linked this way. So like there's solid going across and solid coming down. That is a solid, not getting any water in there, not breaking this down. We're pretty much not digesting this. So that's cellulose. That's the cell wall of like your vegetables. When you're eating like green beans, for instance, they have like that you kind of chew it up, and you kind of break it up into small pieces, but like it doesn't break down the same way that like the inside part of a potato does, right? So like the inside part of a potato is very starchy, and then like the skin of a potato, even that, if you just like chewed up, like if you were to like, this would be a very weird thing to do, but like if you peeled your potatoes and you just cooked the potato skins and chewed it like crazy, you would still feel like it would just be like a lot of you really didn't break it down that much, right? If I chewed like mashed potatoes and sat there and just like set it in my mouth this is so nasty, but like just chewed it for 5 minutes, it would be this like wet, goopy mixture by the end of it, right? Whereas if I did the same thing with potato skins, I don't know, it would kind of just be a bunch of like, it'd be like water in between those chunks, but the water's certainly not getting absorbed. So that's where you find the fiber in a potato. The fiber in a potato is going to be found in the skin, which is why health-wise, leave the skin on your freaking potatoes, guys. That's how you increase your fiber intake. So fiber are such complex chains that the body can't break them down, and so they pass through the digestive tract basically whole, right? Glycogen is very liquidy. That's why we store it in our liver and in our muscles, because we need those things to be liquidy, right? And then we got starch, and there's a lot of different versions of starches out there. The big ones we talk about are amylose and amylopectin and stuff, but there's other versions as well. So different foods are going to have like different levels of those, right? Now when we look at like the role that they play, like the function, right? Their big job is to provide us with energy. They are also considered protein sparing. We call them protein sparing because if you have enough carbohydrates, and fat is also considered somewhat protein sparing, but if you have enough like calories coming in from things that are not protein, your body doesn't have to break down protein for calories. That becomes not its purpose anymore, right? It releases some of the energy and you still get calories from protein, obviously. But your body can use that protein to repair your body, right? It can keep itself running and make new proteins itself. You don't want to necessarily just break them down and convert all the protein that you have into glucose and then use that glucose for fuel. Instead, you'd rather leave that amino acid alone and turn it back into a protein later. So we call carbohydrates protein sparing because if you have enough of them, you don't have to do that, right? Kind of like my checking account is savings account sparing. You know what I mean? Like, as long as I don't overspend, I don't have to get into my savings account, to make up for that. So it's a protein sparing situation, right? So it acts as the primary source of energy, particularly in places where you need fast energy. One of those places is definitely your nervous system. Your nervous system loves to use glucose as a fuel source because it is very fast and very explosive working. And then another fun thing is it's also going to help you metabolize fat more effectively. One of the ways that we look at like beta oxidation and uh, so if you look at like the way beta oxidation works, we're looking at like oxidizing a fat, right? You can use free fatty acids directly for energy, right? So we do what we call beta oxidation to the individual fat molecule, and that converts it to, if you look at the Krebs cycle here, the very first part of the Krebs cycle is converting it into this little pink thing right here, acetyl-CoA. Now, this is really complicated looking. You guys don't have to like have any of this memorized or anything. I just want to explain it so it makes a little bit of sense. This is the start of the Krebs cycle. We need to get something turned into what's called acetyl coenzyme A, or acetyl-CoA. And then it goes in through the wheel here and eventually does everything it does to become energy, right? So as we need acetyl-CoA. Where are we going to get acetyl-CoA? Well, normally glucose, right, ferments into lactic acid, right? And lactic acid is what, thanks to this right here, becomes that acetyl-CoA. Okay, so lactic acid, or we call it pyruvate sometimes, pyruvic acid, ferments into lactic acid, converts into acetyl-CoA, and then goes through the Krebs cycle here. Well, you can skip that entirely. You can skip needing pyruvate. If you're on like a keto diet, for instance, your body will just immediately skip that whole process, and it will instead oxidize a fat. It'll use beta oxidation, a little bit of extra oxygen, a little bit of extra water, oxidize that fat and turn that fat into acetyl-CoA. And then that can go through the Krebs cycle. So it's a little bit of a roundabout way to do it, but it kind of skips it, right? It skips, and in a lot of ways, that's actually very efficient. So people who are on like high protein diets or low carbohydrate diets, they're kind of doing that instead. But in order to facilitate beta oxidation, we need carbohydrates as a sort of like precursor, right? We actually want to have some version of carbohydrates. So how do we actually get it? Well, we turn fat into a carbohydrate, or we turn protein into a carbohydrate. People who are on like a keto diet, who are not consuming carbohydrates, are doing that in a very roundabout way. They're instead turning it into what we call ketone bodies. And when there's a lot of ketone bodies in the body, we call that ketosis. Ketosis is going to allow you to basically skip glycolysis and go straight to your aerobic metabolism, which is good for long, sustainable energy, but it's not so good for big, explosive, fast energy, which is one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of athletes doing keto, but you see a lot of like average people who are on like weight loss diets do pretty well on keto, right? And then there's other benefits to it as well. The keto diet is a super high fat diet, which means you get to eat bacon every day. So people love it. If you ask me, is keto better for weight loss? Or if you asked me, is keto more healthy than a standard diet? I would say no. I don't think it's better, but I do think it's a tool that you can use. I've goofed around with keto here and there. I play a lot of sports, so I felt gunky while I was doing it. I found that like I couldn't sprint as hard. I found that my performance suffered. I didn't do as well in the gym unless I was powerlifting, which is also high intensity, but remember that's creatine high intensity. So if I kept the reps below 5, I would do fine on a keto diet intensity wise. But from 6 to 12, it was like running my body on sludge. And then doing cardio at like long duration, low intensity, I felt great. But doing sprints, I felt terrible. And that makes sense that, I don't have access to glycolysis during like a keto diet. It's just not how things are going to run. Now, most people spend most of their day in the aerobic system. There's, you guys are probably sitting down right now. And so when people are like, I felt like I had so much energy while I was on keto, we have a different way of describing energy. I consider myself to have a lot of energy if I can play sports explosively. But I get it. They're talking about like, no, I just felt like I didn't get sleepy in the middle of the day. And it's like, that's a different type of having energy. You're talking about having long, low intensity energy. Generally, when I'm talking about energy, I'm talking about short term explosive energy, right? So do I think keto can be fine? Yeah, absolutely. I just don't think, I think that it's really unfair to say that it's superior to an average diet. Um, that's my take on it. Anybody have any questions on that particular topic? I know like keto is some people are big keto fans, and I hope it doesn't sound like I'm bashing keto here. And
I did
also,
keto before.
yeah,
I got ripped, but yeah, I did feel like my energy level wasn't good.
yeah, I think a lot of people describe it as like they feel great during the day, on average, right? But like, yeah, I find it to be just not so good. Uh,
Yeah.
not so good for like athletics.
Yep.
And then also, I do think one of the problems with keto, like I said, there are a lot of vitamins and minerals that are going to be found in your vegetables, and vegetables are generally like one of the best sources of potassium out there, guys. What do you think one of the best sources of potassium is? Somebody tell me.
Bananas.
What is it?
Bananas.
Bananas. Guess what? Potatoes actually have more potassium in them. Take a look here. Kind of blows your mind, right? Because bananas are the famous one. But you got one banana, it's going to have about 400 milligrams of potassium in it. You got one potato, it's going to have like 600 grams in it. Now, that's not me saying bananas are a bad source of potassium, right? But there's more in potatoes. We never hear them, mentioned, right? Yeah, maybe not quite as many. That's so funny. Yeah, French fries maybe not the best source. I love that. What is this? What? Doge? Well, I don't know what's happening here. Anyway, so yeah, a lot of, and that's the thing. There's a lot of vitamins and minerals found in your starchy carbs, right? And so we like starchy carbs for that reason. I'm a big fan of carbohydrates. I also think that like, you hear people talk about like a vegan diet, right? And they're like, no, you get so many vitamins and minerals. Yeah, but technically Oreos are vegan. So all you have to do to stick to a vegan diet is just not eat anything that has animal sources in it, right? Um, Sweet potatoes, I think, have less potassium, but they have more vitamin A. Let's find out. Oh no, I was wrong. It's about 700 milligrams. Yeah, that's even more than a regular potato. So there you go. Love that. Good question, Freddie. Oreos are vegan, right? So in order to stick to a vegan diet, I could just eat Oreos every day, right? Doesn't mean that veganism doesn't directly translate to being healthy, right? I think that it super can be. It's a great way to get a lot of if you are doing it with like, but like if I'm eating on a vegan diet of, pasta, Oreos, what else can I do that's like, fine in general? Yeah, bananas, fruits, and things like that. Those things are decent, but like those are all very low protein sources. Didn't get any beans, didn't get any lentils in there, and I didn't get any greens in there, right? Like cereal is vegan as long as I use almond milk. So it's not about like veganism instantly being considered healthy. I know what we're all thinking of when we think of veganism. We think of a lot of like salads. Salads are very high and very colorful, right? So the same problem exists on like a carnivore diet, right? There's not a lot of vegetables oftentimes like starchy ones, salads and things like that that are low enough calories, sure. But like a lot of people who do like carnivore diets will do it eating just like red meat, chicken, things like that. Whereas like if you need like the vitamin and mineral sources that you're going to get from like an animal, you're going to need to go to like organ meats. Liver and things like that have a lot of vitamins in them that you wouldn't get from the other types of sources. So that one, carnivore in particular, I find is probably more difficult to get vegetables in. And then this problem exists in keto diets as well, right? There's like two versions of all of these diets. There's a good, healthy vegan diet, and then there's like what is vegan but like not healthy, right? There's two versions of keto. There's like good keto versus bad keto. So if I can find a picture of this. I just want to find like somebody who, because all I have to do is just eat fats, right? So if I have like, you know, yeah, now the internet is so black and white about things. Yeah, actually this works, right? So here's a keto diet, right? This is very high in fat, chicken with a side of like bacon, right? Versus like chicken with a side of like avocado, which has just as much fat as bacon does, a little bit less protein. And then like all these vegetables here, which are low enough in carbohydrates that they're still falling under like a keto diet, right? So it's like, I look at like the standard diets that we're seeing here. People talk about how they're like, oh no, you can't eat carbs. Carbs are bad for you, right? Carbs, do include things like soda. Yeah, that's not so great for you. But keto involves things that, like bacon, which is super high in fat, low in protein, and it's all saturated fat, right? It's not that great for you. And then like vegetarianism, you got things like Oreos, like it's not about the diet being good or bad, right? It's about like which foods you're choosing while still falling in the realms of your diet. So do I think keto can be healthy? Sure. Do I think carnivore can be pulled off? I will say I think carnivore is one of the harder ones, but it can be healthy, right? Absolutely. Do I think a standard American diet can be healthy? Absolutely, I do. So hopefully that kind of, fits into what we're sort of talking about here. Now, I know some of you guys, like somebody out there might be doing keto, so I fully support you. So I mean, I know Max, you're a big carnivore guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and a lot of people like feel great on it. Um, that's the thing. It's not that there is a good what I really get like itchy around, what kind of drives me a little crazy is somebody who is on keto or somebody who is vegan or somebody who is on the carnivore telling everybody else that what they're doing is categorically just bad. They use the term bad. I don't like that. That's what usually where I'm like, that's not how we talk about. That's not how we should talk about food. um, so trans fats are not so great. Alcohol's not so great. I'll say those things. So then we got our fiber intake, right? Fiber facilitating the, sort of cleaning out your GI tract, right? We know that foods that are super rich in fiber are a really good way to kind of clean us out by grabbing some of those things. Oh yes. Oh, by the way, one more thing. I did say like juice cleanses. I'm not a big fan of cleanses. I think those are not so great because they are often just low calorie, low nutrient diets. But do I dislike juices in someone's diet? Of course not. I think juices are great. They're just a giant jar of vitamins and minerals, Like I can't argue with that. I do like smoothies better than I like juices personally because smoothies will usually have the fiber left in them. Like juicing takes out a lot of fiber. Whereas like smoothies just chops everything up and puts it in like a big thing. So I like that better personally. Or like I like a chunky juice. But that's, I don't like cleanses. So fiber reduces the risk of certain types of cancers because it does also kind of clean out your GI tract. We have seen like certain foods that are super low or certain diets that are very low in fiber are linked to things like colon cancer, rectal cancer, things like that, because they do tend to leave things in the body sitting there for a long time, and then you're covered in atoms that can become like oxidized and damaged. And then they're going to start damaging their surrounding environment. That surrounding environment is you, right? So we don't want our cells to kind of get modified. This is one of the reasons why we want a diet that's rich in what we call antioxidants. And I'll talk about antioxidants tomorrow, because your vitamins are really good examples of antioxidants. But basically, antioxidants fight what we call oxidative stress, and it's where like basically free roaming atoms modify their surrounding environment. If that surrounding environment is you and it ends up being your DNA, you end up making like derpy cells. Non-functioning cells don't really do anything for you other than like replicate and take over tissues, like a tumor, right? Like so we want to avoid that. So I'll talk about that more tomorrow. But that's, again, carbohydrates, really good source of vitamins. Vitamins are antioxidants. Really good source of fiber. Fiber pulls stuff through your GI tract. So that's what we're talking about. One of the reasons why I do sort of like validate the use of carbohydrates. I like them. So what are the factors that are going to influence your carbohydrate intake? Your body weight is one, obviously, like your size, right? The more you weigh, the more you need. Percentage of your total calories, that could be a way to do it. Your metabolic demands, if you're an athlete, you probably need more. And your health conditions. If you're a diabetic, maybe you need less, right? But generally, this is what I want you guys to have memorized. Everybody log this into your brains, circle this on your notes. But we have the AMDR, the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. The typical US recommended FDA version of this, CDC recommended amount of carbohydrates. The AMDR that all of you need memorized is 45 to 65% total daily calories. So 45 to 65% is the recommended. So if you were on a 2,000 calorie diet, you would multiply that by 45 and 65. And you want somewhere between 900 and 1,300 calories from carbohydrates per day. Because there are 4 grams in a carbohydrate, we divide that number by 4. That's anywhere from 225 and 325 grams per day on a 2,000 calorie diet. Obviously, we've talked about this before. You probably need more than that. So that's one way to do it. Now, athletes, it's probably going to be a little bit different. We instead are going to recommend our carbohydrate consumption on what type of athlete they are and their body weight, because we're basing it on their potential for having glycogen stores, right? So if they're a recreational athlete, they're training less than an hour a day. That's not very intense. They might only need like 3 to 6 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. If they're like an ultra endurance athlete, like a Ironman runner or triathlete, well, they're probably going to need closer to 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that's, more than triple there, right? And that makes sense because, they need a lot more carbohydrates to give them the energy necessary to get through their athletic event. But the number that you're going to be tested on, guys, you're not going to get tested on these numbers here. The number that they want you to know for your test, 45 to 65%. Log it. So good sources. We've got grains, barleys, oatmeals, quinoas. Those are all good sources of the grain versions. We've got things like oatmeals, wheat berries. We've got vegetables, fresh or frozen, guys. Here's the thing about the whole fresh versus frozen thing. If you guys want a really good article, NASM actually put one out. NASM put a really good article of this out at one point. Actually, that's not it. Where is it? Shoot. Oh, that's not right. But this is a decent, is kind of talking about it. They're talking about what I want. Oxidation. Looking for that word. Yes. Okay. Here's a decent, really fast article, actually. This isn't as big as the NASM one, but okay. So, fresh or frozen, guys, which is better? It kind of depends. here's the thing, certain vegetables, you know, once they cut a vegetable, it starts oxidizing instantly. So it's losing nutrient quality the second it's cut from the ground. That's okay, because there's still a lot of nutrients kind of left in, but certain foods are a little bit more resistant to that oxidation than others. Typically the foods that have like a pretty intense skin on them. So like, do you need to eat, like, should we freeze potatoes in order to ensure that they maintain their nutrients? Nah, because they got a big skin on the outside of them. They're probably fine. But you look at like a berry or something like that. Berries, unfortunately, like this is all being like exposed to the air. You know, there's a little bit of skin, you know, like blueberries are actually fairly resistant, blackberries somewhat, you know. But for the most part, like that, if the skin is just kind of part of their body rather than having like a separate layer, they're not very resistant to oxygen. Like carrots, for instance, you know, they've got this like hard film on the outside of it. It's one of the reasons why, guys, you want to make your carrots taste way better? Shave those darn things. Baby carrots, on the other hand, they lose a lot of nutrients because that's already all kind of processed and shaved down. Broccoli, it's kind of just being exposed to the elements, you know? So the more exposed it is, chances are the more you will maintain nutrients by getting a frozen version. But like green beans, like I'm looking here, like green beans have this huge outer shell on the outside. That's, I don't know, I think you can get those fresh from the grocery store and probably be a little bit better off. So which is better, fresh or frozen? It's honestly not even that worth worrying about. Frozen is great sometimes, fresh is great other times. They're all vegetables though, guys. Just get them into your body. So each has its own benefits and drawbacks. Dairy is a source of carbohydrates, believe it or not. I know that we think of it and we think of protein because that's the marketing industry that we've all been growing up around. But there's actually a lot of sugar found in milk. There is protein. There is definitely also saturated fat, right? But like certain, you know, certain like yogurts and cheese products, those are usually a little bit lower on carbohydrates, but sometimes you'll find carbs. Process of making cheese, for instance, pulls those sugars out of there. That's actually why certain like lactose intolerant people, you might find that cheese is actually okay, because a lot of times they've taken the lactose out in the cheese making process. But not all of them. You know, like brie, for instance, I think is kind of high in carbs. So, you know, different, you know, milks and stuff out there. And then there are some protein heavy carbohydrates out there as well. Beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, all of those are really good examples of carbohydrates. Beef, chicken, fish, eggs, and other animal products, not so much. There's going to be practically nothing in there. The only carbs you're going to find in animal products are like leftover glycogen chains, which taste terrible. It's actually why they strip, you know, let all that kind of strip out at the butcher. So here's the, oh, and then sweets and desserts and stuff, they are certainly carbohydrates, right? So here's the thing about like, you know, choosing your carbohydrate options. What you want to most focus on, guys, are nutrient dense carbohydrate options instead of energy dense carbohydrate options. Focus more on getting nutrients. Look at your carbohydrate options and choose the ones that are high in vitamins and minerals rather than choosing the ones that are high in calories. How do you tell if something is high in calories? Well, it's probably going to be very high on what we call the glycemic index. Glycemic index is this index that basically classifies foods on how quickly they enter your bloodstream. We talked about how carbohydrates can spike your blood sugar levels, right? Soda, super high on the glycemic index. But then again, so are apples, because apples are mostly sugar. So which is healthier for you? The apple, because it's still got vitamins and minerals in it, right? So we're really paying attention to how quickly we get these in. I mean, even potatoes are relatively high on the glycemic index. You know, you can see here. Doesn't mean it's necessarily unhealthy. There are some critics of the glycemic index out there, and it makes a lot of sense, actually. They should be critical of it because we don't necessarily eat foods in isolation. So like, for instance, apples, I just said, are really high on the glycemic index, right? So that might make you think, oh, well, then diabetics can never eat apples because they'll spike their blood sugar level. But here's the thing. You take an apple with like some peanut butter, which has like a lot of protein in it, and it's got a lot of fat in it. those things have to process and they slow the absorption of those other nutrients because they're in the way, kind of gumming up the works. A little bit of cheese with your apple, right? There you go. That actually slows how quickly that food can enter your bloodstream. So I like the glycemic index as a chart to understand, but it's definitely not like black and white information where it's like, if it's high on the glycemic index, you should never eat it. That's not what I'm saying. There's lots of things that are high on the glycemic index. Again, go back here. White rice, here's the thing, white rice, yeah, it has less vitamins and minerals in it than brown rice does, but it still has like some vitamins and minerals, and it's a very good source of energy. So if that's what you want to eat and you get your vitamins and minerals from some vegetables on the side of your plate, fine. I'm not here to tell you guys you can't eat white rice. Sweet potatoes, they're really hot. They're just below ice cream, actually, believe it or not. But sweet potatoes, if you leave the skin on and you keep the fiber on it, that's going to slow absorption. You eat it with something that's also like maybe some protein at dinner, like a sweet potato and a chicken breast. Hey, all of a sudden you're getting great sources, and it's going to slow your absorption down. So how do we utilize carbohydrates during exercise? Now, they are meant to be a fuel. So, maybe just before you go into the gym, maybe you do eat like a simple carbohydrate. Simpler it is, more intense your energy is going to be, right? So carbohydrates are used for you your high intensity exercise, but they're still working in the background during low to moderate intensity exercise as well. So carbohydrates are supporting your aerobic metabolism because we call it the crossover point, right? It's where fats are becoming like most of your fuel source, but you're still burning some carbohydrates. You're doing a little bit of glycolysis in the background consistently. Sometimes you'll hear people that refer to this as the fat burning zone. It's where your intensity is like relatively low so that you're focused on burning a high percentage of fats. Guys, that's about 65 to 75% of your heart rate max, by the way. So the intensity is pretty low there. We call that zone 1 for those of you who have been through my program design classes. The 65 to 75% range means that you're burning carbs in the background, but you're primarily burning fat as a fuel source. And there's that metabolic pathway there. So in terms of storing carbohydrates in the body, we've got glycogen, which is that storage form. It's a starch there. And you're going to have about 400 to 600 grams of carbohydrates stored in your liver and throughout your muscles. That's about 16 to 2,400 calories worth. So, anybody in here who has done keto will tell you about the keto flu, which is not a real thing. I mean, it is a real thing. But it's not a flu. But it's where they feel really junky when they first cut out carbohydrates. And what that is your body going, hey, I want some carbs. Like, hey, I'm gonna make you hurt if you don't give me some carbohydrates. And so you get like headaches and things like that because your body's kind of craving it. You feel really junky. Best advice I can give you is to try to push through that as quick as possible. Sometimes people can stay in that kind of mid craving zone for like up to like 3 days sometimes. My advice is to just get into ketosis as fast as possible I know you're hungry. On an empty stomach, go work out real hard. Go get where you are doing some sprints, working really hard. Use your muscles, stay in glycolysis as much as you can, and burn through all the glucose you can. If you can get 16 to 2,400 calories worth burned out real quick, you will be through those cravings as fast as possible. Just make sure you stay hydrated because you'll also cramp up like crazy. We store carbohydrates in the body in the form of glycogen, but we can also convert those carbohydrates into triglycerides. We can store them in our fat cells. So if your glycogen stores are full, excess carbohydrates are converted into fat, and then we store that as fat. And we got about 90,000 calories per fat cell in the body, right? So there's a lot of energy stored in those triglycerides over the course of your life. says fat cell. I should say fat cells. They're great. So summarizing everything up, they're a really efficient source of glycolysis. So high intensity exercise, they can be metabolized very quickly. As long as as long as your intensity sort of requires it and needs it, right? So if you are exercising about 4 hours prior, you probably want to get some complex carbohydrates to make sure that you've got a low sustained energy. And about 2 hours prior to exercise, you want to probably get something that's a little bit more simple so that your blood sugar spikes before your athletic event. Now, you do want to make sure that like the type of carbohydrates is a good mixture. You are choosing mostly nutrient dense options. Gatorade and things like that have been popularized in sports, but those are very energy dense options. There's a lot of calories in Gatorade, but there aren't necessarily a lot of vitamins. And then there are minerals, but only sodium and potassium because those are electrolytes. But I do not consider Gatorade to be a nutritious type food, but it can be used as a tool. So adequate carbohydrate are essential for optimal performance. Ideally, you want to see anywhere from 45 to 65% of your total calories. You'll see here this says 55 to 70. That is for athletes. Athletes need more because they're doing high intensity work. But the number I want you guys to have memorized, 45 to 65%. Everybody in here should know that. That's how many carbohydrates are recommended on the sort of standard diet. They're a really good source of explosive energy. You do want to focus on low glycemic index foods throughout the day, unless you're about to go do some sports, in which case go do some high glycemic index foods. A little bit simpler. The more simple, the faster it's going to kind of come into the body. Your muscles are really good at restoring that glycogen. Just make sure you definitely get some carbohydrates post-workout. Questions, comments, concerns on the carbohydrates, guys? Any questions on that?
Example of a simple carb.
Simple carb would be like something that's very sugary. White bread versus whole wheat bread, or honey or fruits. Although honeys and fruits are both like somewhat nutrient dense options. But the best example of a simple carb is white sugar, like you put in your coffee.
Got it.
As simple as it gets. Sorry, Alan, did you have a question? Or are you just feeling good?
No, I said I don't have questions.
Oh, got it. Okay.
All right.
Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at fats next, right? So fats, also very important. They're a little simpler than carbohydrates. NASM always does the same thing. They always do a ton of carbohydrate work and then they skim over the other ones. So fats, very vital nutrient for athletes and non-athletes alike, because all of your cells are made of fat. If you look at your cells, they have what's called your phospholipid bilayer, which is basically bi means two. It's a double layer of phospholipids. Well, what is a phospholipid? Well, it's a little fatty acid with it's a glycerol backbone with two fatty acids on it. So it looks kind of like this. So if I took a whole bunch of those and stacked them edge to edge to edge, two little tails on each of these, and I did another one like this, you're actually going to see we've got two sides here. And so what that is you've got a hydrophobic side. Phobic means you're scared of something, right? And you've got a hydrophilic side. So this side here is hydrophobic. Right? It does not like hydro. It does not like water. But this side does. This side right here is hydrophilic. Okay, so it loves water. So what happens when you put oil in water is it looks like this, right? It doesn't mix. And the reason it doesn't mix, it makes these big globules, is because basically the hydrophobic side faces inward and the hydrophilic side faces outward. And this is what all of your cells use in order to keep fluid inside your cell and keep fluids outside of your cell. So you'll have your extracellular water and your intracellular water, or you would have your extracellular water and your cytoplasm. So if we look at your cells, your cell walls, they look like this. Animal cell. It's technically not a wall, it's a membrane, but help me out here. Too simple with the drawings there. There we go. So your cells kind of look like this, right? They have like this cell wall around the outside. So fats are a pretty important part of our diet. That's how we get our cell walls. You need it to make all of them. So they're a vital nutrient. They're a really good source of energy, especially when you're at rest, right? The lower your intensity, the more we burn fat as a fuel source. And they're a great way to make sure that you're getting enough calories in your diet, right? They also supply you with those fatty acids, like I said, are very important. We also make our hormones from fats. So that's another reason we need to consume fats in our diet, right? They help us carry vitamins into our bloodstream, those fat-soluble vitamins. That's a huge one. And what's really nice about fats in terms of just like a diet perspective, it's easy to stick to a diet high in fat. This is another reason why like keto is so popular. Like I said earlier, not only is bacon popular because it's delicious, but also it's very popular because it leaves you feeling full longer. You do not hear a lot of keto people complain about being on their diet because they feel really satiated. That's very, 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 very good for that. It's highly associated with satiety or feeling satiated. Now, I don't think it's in my slide, so I had to put it in the notes myself. AMDR, another number I need you guys to have memorized. Put it in your brain, get it stuck there. 45 to 65% for carbs, 20 to 35% for fat. Okay, so 20 to 35% of your total intake. That's to pass your regular test. Your advanced nutrition certification, you're going to get a harder version of this question. How much saturated fat? 7 to 10%. Okay, so on a 2,000 calorie diet times 0.2, that would be 400 calories from fat, or 2,000 times 35%. So anywhere from 400 to 700 calories. There's 9 calories in a gram, so we divide that by 9. That's 44. Oops. So 44 to 77 grams per day. And then in terms of saturated, that would be 2,000 times 7%. And then times 10%. So 2,000 times. So I can have 44 to 77 grams of fat per day. And of that fat, 15 to 22 grams of it should be as much saturated as I get on a 2,000 calorie diet. So this is the advanced question. You might get that in your nutrition exam. But the general exam, I need you guys to know 20 to 35%. Okay. So what are fats in general? Well, they're a group. We call them lipids, right? They're going to come in 3 varieties. Triglycerides, which is kind of like that phospholipid bilayer. But remember I said this is like, where to put? That's 2 tails, right? A triglyceride would have 3 tails instead of just the 2, right? So right? So a triglyceride is a triple fatty acid. Phospholipids are a double fatty acid, and sterols are a single. Sterols are what eventually will become our hormones. So we get these sterols become hormones. Phospholipids are our essential fatty acids that are our cell walls, and triglycerides are what we are actually consuming. You see them listed on your nutrition facts panel, right? When you look at a food and it says this many grams of saturated fat versus unsaturated. Saturated versus unsaturated, and trans fats. Those are the three types of triglycerides. So there's some like interesting like subcategories here, right? Let's go ahead and make a little chart so we can understand this stuff, right? So if I've got triglycerides, you know what? So if I've got triglycerides here, oh no, don't do that. They're going to come in a couple different varieties, okay? We're going to see saturated, and we are going to see unsaturated. All right, now unsaturated also kind of has some separations here. Mono unsaturated or poly unsaturated. And then technically it is also a triglyceride. We got trans fats. Okay, these we don't want to eat. Trans fats are very, very bad for us. They destroy all the good fat we've got in our body. We've got diglycerides, or more commonly referred to as phospholipids. Okay, these are your essential fatty acids. Okay, so we're going to split these. There's actually more than this, but I'm going to talk about the ones that we actually talk about. So these are our, actually, I guess all I have to do is do this. Your essential fatty acids, okay? Right, and that essential fatty acids, that divides down into two varieties. You've heard of them. You've got your omega-3s. And you've got your omega-6s. Okay, so those are your diglycerides. And then we've got our monoglycerides, or sterols. Which we would call sterols. Right? Sterols, by the way, sounds pretty similar to another word that we all know, steroids, right? So those are going to be your cholesterols. And you are going to see HDL versus LDL. Okay, so those are the three kind of categories of fats and then all of their little subcategories, right? So HDL is the good cholesterol, LDL is the bad cholesterol. The reason I said trans fats are so bad for us is because they actually have a lot of what are called VLDLs, very low density lipoproteins. And they actually they're so undense, they don't just like sit there, they destroy your good cholesterol. So like they're real evil. Omega-3s and omega-6s, these are essential fatty acids. You are usually going to find these in your unsaturated fatty acid sources. That's why we consider oils to be so healthy. And then your saturated fat is going to have some of the LDL, but it will still have some HDL. I think saturated fat gets a really bad rap in this country, but it's not nearly as bad as we kind of have made it out to be over the years. So that's everything I'm about to talk about. So I moved a little, I jumped ahead of myself. That's everything summarized in one chart. So triglycerides are, your saturated versus unsaturated fat. And the reason we consider saturated fat to be bad is because it's high in the types of sterols that are not so good for us and low in phospholipids. The reason we consider the unsaturated fat to be so good for us is because it's really rich in phospholipids and has the good types of sterols in it. Now, there is the evil one. There is hydrogenation. Now, hydrogenation is actually adding hydrogen atoms to unsaturated fats. Remember we talked about the seats at the table analogy? Saturated versus unsaturated fats. it's a liquid versus a solid, right? The reason it's a solid is because all the seats at the table are filled. And the reason this one's a liquid is because there's an empty space. Now, if you superheat that unsaturated fat, you take it above a temperature that would normally exist on Earth. You know, we invented those temperatures by learning how to cook things. And so particularly by deep frying things. So if you take an oil above boiling, what will happen is it will start stripping hydrogen out of the atmosphere. There's a lot of hydrogen gas in our atmosphere. And so you start to hydrogenate the fat. So what you have is an unsaturated fat that ends up straightening itself out because it fills, you are sort of forcing these empty seats to be filled. And then when that happens, that's how we get what we call it a trans fat. Trans means to modify something. So we modified the fat. That's how you make deep fried foods, which are, you know, not so good for us. So your saturated fats are filled hydrogen binding sites. They are typically solid at room temperature because you know, they can stack very efficiently. These are usually found in animal sources. They're also very high in our low density cholesterols, which is why saturated fats are considered the not so good stuff, right? We've got the unsaturated fat. That's our oils, right? They have hydrocarbon chains that are empty. And so really good. So like monounsaturated fats just means that there's one kink, like in the picture here. And then like a polyunsaturated fat would just be like multiple kinks. They never draw polyunsaturated, but it's the same thing with like multiple, there we go, multiple kinks in it. So saturated, unsaturated. Oh, hold on. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Anyway, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated. Spell those wrong both times. It's not good. There we go. So see that there, guys? One empty seat at the table, multiple empty seats at the table. So polyunsaturated fats are really good for us. They're a really good source of omega-3 fatty acids. You're typically going to find those in like fish sources. So like fish oils, the reason they're so good for us is because they have those essential fatty acids. Why are they essential? Why are they so important? Well, that's how we get these. Those are phospholipids, right? So the fatty acids that are essential because they make up our cell walls. That's why we need these in our diets, right? So omega-3s you're typically going to find in fish sources. EPA and DHA are the names of those. So really fatty fish, walnuts, chia seeds, flaxseed, and then typically like olive oils, peanuts, peanut oil, and things like that. You're going to find your omega-6s. We're starting to kind of villainize omega-6s in the last few years because now we're starting to get like a lot of them. The omega-3s are the ones that people tend to not get enough of because we just don't like as much fish in this country. And then we got the hydrogenated fats. Those are the ones where you basically took those healthy fats and ruined them. They actually have been shown to destroy our good fats, and they're highly associated with those really, really, really bad cholesterols. So essential fatty acids must be obtained by your diet. The name for those are linoleic and linolenic acids. That's omega-3 and omega-6, by the way. Way easier to say than that. Then we've got our phospholipids. These are, like I said, they got that glycerol backbone, right? And they make up our cell walls. Then we've got our sterols. These are the cholesterols you're thinking of, right? So they're going to come in two different varieties. You're going to have LDL cholesterol. That's the low density stuff. Not so good for us. And then you're going to have your HDL. That's your high density stuff. That's the good stuff, right? HDL kind of cleans out the blood vessels, right? LDL kind of doesn't. Now, again, you actually need both of them. Like, you know, this is one of those things that like, it's easier to describe it this way, but you guys need to be experts on this stuff. So we got to be more complicated with it. like, I don't want to make LDL cholesterol sound like it's like, oh, it's this thing that we somehow picked up and it got stuck in our body and it's slowly killing us. It's not what it is. Like, LDL cholesterol still does stuff in the body, right? Let's see here. So for instance, when you look at like the differences between your LDL and your HDL cholesterol, right? LDL cholesterol delivers cholesterols, which will become things like hormones and stuff like that, to your cells. HDL removes excessive cholesterol from your cells, takes it to your liver, and then your liver actually uses it to make bile, which helps break down fats later. So that's, actually really important, right? Like, we like LDL cholesterol in some capacity. It's just too much of a good thing, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And so it ends up, instead of moving and transporting stuff the way it's supposed to, the stuff instead clogs up our arteries because we get way too much of it. Again, I said I don't hate sugar earlier. I mean, I do in really high amounts, but it's great before sports. Well, LDL cholesterol has a purpose. It's just we get too much of it, right? Why? Probably because the stuff that's high in LDL cholesterol tastes really good and has a longer shelf life. The stuff that's high in HDL cholesterol, usually is a little blander and doesn't have as long a shelf life. So we just don't have as much of it in our diet. So fat recommendations, guys: 20 to 35%. Log it. 7 to 10% from saturated sources. So here's some really rich omega-3 foods. Like I said, you're going to find omega-3 fatty acids. Best sources that I can think of, you're going to see are fatty fish like mackerel, salmon, flounder, which is actually a pretty lean fish, but flounder I don't think of, but it has a good amount for how many calories it has. Cod liver oil is a really good one. My carnivore people, that's a really good one for you. Salmon oil is pretty good. You'll also find it in canola, soybean, walnut, and flax seeds. But typically you're going to find less EPA and more DHA. So you'll find more omega-6s in these things and a little bit less omega-3s. But walnuts and flax seeds are still pretty good. And it's not bad. So we like our fatty acids. If you find that you just do not like fish in your diet, that's okay, guys. Just do me a favor, take a fish oil supplement. It's going to be good for you. We just lost Matt. We lost our carnivore guy. So there are going to be different amounts of fats in certain foods. Whole grains, usually fairly low in fat. But they are coming from seeds and stuff, so you will find like low levels of unsaturated healthy fat in whole grain bread. Biscuits and croissants, those have been superheated, so that's where you're going to find trans fats. Try to stay away from those. Fruits and vegetables, usually not very much fat in those. They actually rely more on sugars to kind of feed themselves, so that's why fruits and vegetables are higher and carbohydrates instead. But your best source are going to be your oils, right? The oils found in nuts, seeds, and things like olives. So really oily food. Dairy is super high in fat as well, but it's all saturated because it is coming from an animal source. And then protein has a ton of fat in it as well. But again, it's all going to be saturated because it's coming from an animal source. Fish, really good source of saturated and unsaturated. And there's a lot of phospholipids found in fish. So we love it for those omega-3 purposes. Learn how to cook salmon, guys. It is real good for you. That's why I insisted on salmon at the wedding. Now, in terms of cholesterol, the sources that are going to be really rich in cholesterol in general are typically going to be things like meats, because again, an animal's body assembled those sterols, right? So, red meat, very high in LDL cholesterol. Eggs, high in, both types of cholesterol, really. And then baked goods that have a lot of eggs and dairy products in them, very high. So when we're looking at cholesterol, we're looking at the total cholesterol, and then we're comparing the ratio of HDL good stuff to LDL bad stuff. And that estimates our risk of cardiovascular disease. Ideally, we want to have a lot of HDL cholesterol and little LDL cholesterol. Again, typically in the way that like we live in this world, LDL is considered to be the bad stuff, HDL is considered to be the good stuff, because the diet that we've sort of created on in America is very high in LDL and very low in HDL. So our ratios are out of whack, which is why we end up clogging it up with all that LDL cholesterol. Again, this is why like the conversation around eggs is so complicated, right? I got a great video to show you guys that I forgot about, all about eggs. We're gonna watch it in a couple days, but you know, we used to think eggs were bad because they were full of cholesterol in general, but then we found out that the ratio of them was pretty darn good. But then we also found out that like it doesn't really matter how it's, you know, how eggs are absorbed. It really matters, you know, much more how you're creating it in your body. So we're all over the place on that conversation. Are eggs bad for us? Eggs are high in cholesterol. That's what we know. Whether it's bad for you or not is kind of it depends on a lot of other factors, right? So here's how we can metabolize fats. You guys remember I said fats will go turn into fatty acids. They will get oxidized and turned into acetyl-CoA directly. So glycolysis would be over here, but it doesn't really happen, right? It just skips that and goes straight to the Krebs cycle. And then it can also go through the, you know, it goes through the whole aerobic metabolism. So fats are a really good source of low, slow energy, long, sustainable, you know, low intensity exercise. So in terms of fat consumption before exercise, try to keep your fat relative, if you're exercising, keep your fat content a little bit low. Sounds a little weird. Why am I telling you to avoid fat in general? Here's what we know about. We want to prioritize, if we're playing a sport, if we're exercising, we want high intensity. So we're trying to prioritize that. So we want to mostly get carbohydrates before a meal. Now, after exercise, this one's also a little bit confusing, but you try to keep your fat levels to somewhat of a minimum, only because fat utilization has been shown to slow protein absorption. And we want to get our protein into our bloodstream post-workout as fast as possible so we can get anabolic quickly. Fat has been shown to kind of slow that down a little bit. So I always tell people around your workouts, keep your fat content somewhat minimized. And then later in the night, if you want to avoid like eating at night and overeating and things like that, fat can be a really good place to supplement that, unless you're exercising at night, in which case a really fatty meal in the morning can actually leave you feeling fuller longer. So use fat as a really good tool to make sure that you don't overeat. It's great. It leaves you feeling full much longer than other things, right? And we love it for that. But it does kind of slow your protein absorption. So I try to keep it away from my workouts and try to stay towards like for instance, like I do like fat-free milk post-workout, but I like whole milk in general because it's super high in fats. So that's my main source of saturated fat, actually. Or like I try to avoid like fatty cuts of meat if I'm trying to get my protein in near a workout. But like later in the day, as I work out in the mornings, that's fine for me. If my schedule is flipped, I would flip it. So high fat diets, yeah, before exercise have not been shown to improve your performance. So that is fat from an athlete's perspective. Little bit, it's not as complicated as it seems. I think fat sometimes sounds more complicated, but you get the triple, double, and single fats. And then you're going to find these doubles and singles in different sources, right? The doubles are typically found in your unsaturated fat. That's why we like those so much. And then you also find the high density cholesterol here as well. And then the LDL cholesterol we find in saturated. And we don't find as many of these good fatty acids in saturated. That's how that works. Questions, comments, concerns. You guys all feeling good about fats?
Sir, yes, sir.
All righty. Stop me if I know I am moving quick, guys, so don't be afraid to ask a question here or there. All right, let's get to the one we all want to talk about. There's a reason protein's at the end of this PowerPoint. So proteins, complex chains of amino acids. Now, fats and carbohydrates were carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But now we got protein, which is those three things, and we're adding nitrogen. So nitrogen is what gives proteins all of its funky shapes, and we use those funky shapes to make a bunch of different types of protein. Some that are in our muscles, actin's a protein, myosin's a protein, troponin's a protein, tropomyosin's a different protein, your DNA is a protein. We've got a billion different types of friggin' enzymes in our body, right? Lactase is one, salivary amylase, and all those enzymes I talked about yesterday when we were talking about digestion, those are all different proteins, right? So a lot of different types of proteins we make inside the body, and they're all held together with what we call a peptide bond. It's just a slightly stronger bond than you would find in like a carbohydrate or a fat. Now, these are usually metabolized to, make different parts of the body. Now, you've seen me pull up drawings of this before, and usually you see the letter R in there. That's called an R group. And there's 20 different varieties represented by that letter R. So we call this like a generic amino acid, right? And then over here, these are two separate amino. This is actually what they would actually look like, right? There's no R listed because it's showing you what the R sort of looks like, right? The backbone is kind of the same. You see that? HNCCOH, HNCCOH, CCOH, right? But then, and even a little bit of hydrogen at the bottom, HH, these are the same. O right there, all of this is the same. But then see how this is different. HCH with a little carbon ring, and then just a little bit of hydrogen. That's it. So these are different amino acids. 20 varieties exist, 20 different shapes, right? Like 20 different letters of the alphabet. So the shape of the protein is determining its function, right? Your bones, your ligaments, your hair, your fingernails, your teeth, your muscles, your enzymes, your organs. Lots of protein. The cell wall, remember earlier I showed you like this is what the cell wall looked like, right? It was just like the phospholipids. Well, the real cell wall looks more like this. You'll actually see a bunch of proteins straddling the cell wall because remember, water can't get from one side to the other. So how do we get water into our cells when we need to hydrate them, or how do we move materials in? Well, there's proteins that straddle, and that way stuff can get sucked into the cell, right? Otherwise, nothing would ever be able to penetrate. So those are also proteins. Lots of proteins in the body, right? And one of the biggest ones is our enzymes. Enzymes are the catalysts for all of our chemical reactions, right? So our immune cells are proteins. They help us transport certain sources. And then, yes, they can be used for energy. So when we look at a protein, there's another kind of generic drawing here. They would actually look something kind of like this, right? But look at all the things they do. Protein is a huge part of our diet, or at least it should be, right? How much of it should you be eating every day? Now, there are two answers to this question. The number I need you guys to have, I need you to have two numbers memorized. One is 20 to 35% total caloric intake. So 45, let's go up. 45 to 65% recommended carbs. Where'd it go? Oh my gosh, where are you? Aha. So 45 to 65% recommended carbs, guys. Everybody memorize that number. For our fats, where'd that go? 20 to 35% total, 7 to 10% saturated. And then for protein, 20 to 35% protein. The other recommendation is going to be based on what type of athlete you are. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's one of the numbers I need you to have memorized. So when we're consuming proteins, what we're doing is we're eating them because we need those amino acids. We need those 20 different amino acids because based on what order I put them in, I need 20 letters. I can make a lot of different words, or I can make a lot of different proteins, right? So when we're classifying them, we classify them the same way we classify all stuff in biology: essential or non-essential. Essential is stuff that we have to eat. It's essential that it's part of our diet. We cannot make these amino acids. So histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine, all of these, don't memorize those, all of these are essential. By the way, somebody might be asking about BCAAs, right? That is going to be right here. Your BCAA examples are valine, leucine, and isoleucine. Those three are the BCAAs. We'll talk about those in just a second. Non-essential amino acids, these are ones that your body can make. So let's say I don't get enough proline in my diet. I just ate a bunch of foods that were kind of missing it, you know? My body's like, oh, we don't have proline. So it's going to take maybe a little bit of aspartic acid and maybe a little bit of phenylalanine. And it'll break them apart and reshape them. And boom, now suddenly I made some proline. Now I've got all 20 letters. I can start cooking, right? And that's how I like to think of amino acids. Picture a chef, right? You've got the world's greatest chef who can literally cook anything as long as he has 20 ingredients. But he will not start cooking unless he has all 20 ingredients. So if one of those ingredients is garlic, and that's essential, and one of those other ingredients is garlic salt, and that's also essential, right? He will not start cooking without them. But like, let's say garlic salt is non-essential, and he's like, hey, I won't start cooking without garlic salt. And you're like, well, we don't have any. He's like, all right, fine. And he takes the garlic and he puts the salt together, and now he makes garlic salt. Now he's got garlic, now he's got salt, now he's got garlic salt. He's got 2 of the essentials, he's got 1 non-essential, he's got all the ingredients necessary. He's going to start cooking, right? So that's how it works. You have to have all 20 to make a protein. Some of them you have to get from your diet. The other ones, your body can make. But either way, any protein your body makes, guys, has all 20. You can't have any protein, any enzyme, any DNA, any of these things. You can't have any of these things without having all 20 ingredients. So that's where we talk about the difference between complete sources of protein in the world and incomplete sources of protein in the world. Complete protein sources are proteins that have all 20 ingredients out the gate. Incomplete sources might be missing 1 or 2. And then the BCAAs, these are ones that can be metabolized for energy, which is kind of nice. BCAAs, like I said, valine, leucine, isoleucine. I mean, we can even see that if I look up a BCAA supplement. Come on. Ugh. There we go. This one, leucine, valine, isoleucine, and then they put glutamine in there as well. Glutamine is not actually a BCAA, but it is. There was a study a really long time ago where they were giving athletes glutamine, and they found that they got really good results during that study. So it led to glutamine being a really, really, really popular like a super, super, super popular supplement for a little while there. I think we discovered that those people just didn't have enough protein in their diet. So like, I'm pretty sure like glutamine's not the most important thing in the world anymore. But there was a study that was done, and so it became very popular for a long time. So that's your BCAAs. So then we talk about like complete proteins. Well, complete proteins, like I said, they've got every amino acid in them. So eggs, dairy products, meat, and fish are all examples of complete proteins. Now, I will say the reason for that is because they're all animal products. If an animal's body assembled amino acids to make a protein, it needed all 20. So if you're eating an animal product, you know it has all 20 amino acids in it. Does that mean you have to eat animal products? No, it does not. If I've got vegans or vegetarians out there, you can still very much get your proteins. You just need to make sure you complement them together. Incomplete proteins are missing one of those essential amino acids. So if you complement them, grain plus a nut, or a legume plus a grain, or a legume plus a nut, as long as you put them together and have them at the same time, you're getting all of your complete proteins. And then there are complete proteins. There are plant products. Soy is so popular because of the fact that it's complete protein. Tempeh, tofu, quinoa is a grain, but it has all amino acids in it. So there are some plant-based sources of complete proteins out there. They're just a little bit less popular. And then you'll sometimes hear the term high quality protein. Basically, that's a protein that's easily digestible. So like, for instance, if I go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac and it's got, it's got 20 grams of protein in it, right? Versus like a lean chicken breast, which also has 20 grams of protein in it. We would call the chicken breast high quality because it's going to be digested faster. Whey protein is very fastly absorbed. Whereas like, the McDonald's hamburger, my body's also going to need to digest all that extra fat, which we said interrupts protein digestion, and it's going to have to process all those carbohydrates and sugars found in the bread. That's going to interrupt that. So high quality protein is basically just fast digesting protein. It's why whey protein powder is such a popular supplement. So obviously we know that protein is important for cellular growth. And we know that proteins have nitrogen in them, which we didn't find in fats or carbs, right? So when I say that you need to get adequate protein, sometimes we'll refer to that as a positive balance, because you are getting more than you are destroying, a positive balance of nitrogen, or a positive nitrogen balance. So in order to facilitate cellular growth, you need to have a positive nitrogen balance, right? In order to create bank account growth, you need to have a positive money balance, right? I spend $500 a month. I make $510 a month, right? So every month my bank account grows by $10. I'm in a positive balance. So if you are exercising regularly, what does the gym do? It destroys your proteins, right? It breaks them down by damaging them. So what do you need to do? You need to get enough protein in your diet to repair that cellular damage. And we don't want to just be perfectly in balance. We probably want to get a little bit extra protein in compared to how much we're damaging. And that will put us in a positive nitrogen balance. How do you ensure that you do that? You got to know how much your client weighs, and you got to understand how much they're exercising. So here's what's confusing. Everybody zone in on what I'm saying right now. What can be very confusing is, earlier I told you, you need to remember 20 to 35% protein intake in your diet. Okay, that is still true. But what I think is a better way to determine your protein intake is to base it on your client's type of athlete and how much they weigh. So strength athletes are the ones who are going to create the most damage, along with like bodybuilders, people who are trying to gain muscle mass or maintain muscle mass while losing weight. These are the two categories that are going to have the highest protein intake, whereas a sedentary individual doesn't need very much. So if I weigh 180 pounds, which by the way is 81 kilograms, if I'm sedentary, I really only need like 65 grams of protein a day. I'm not creating that much cellular damage walking up and down the stairs, But if I'm a strength athlete, or if I'm trying to gain weight or lose weight, right, I might get as high as 2 grams per kilogram. If I weigh 81 kilograms times 2, I should probably getting at least 162 grams a day. That will ensure that I am in a positive nitrogen balance, or a positive protein balance, if you want to call it that. I create a lot of damage by working out a lot. I need enough protein to facilitate that repair. You want to go a little higher than that, by the way? If you go up to 2.2 grams per kilogram, you know what that ends up being? I weigh 180 pounds, right? That's 81 kilograms. So times 2.2 kilograms per pound, I go a little higher than above the recommended here. Oh, look, that's how much I weigh in pounds. So if you want to go with the 1 gram per pound option, you can. It's overdoing it a little bit, but that hasn't been shown to be very damaging, unless you have kidney problems. Kidney problems, don't do that. The leftover nitrogen will make your kidneys work a little too hard. Or if you have struggled with like, yeah, liver problems as well. If anybody, if you have a client who's like a recovering like alcoholic and they got liver damage from alcoholism, doesn't always happen, but it does sometimes. Watch their protein intake as well. You gotta be a little careful there. So that is what I mean when I say a positive nitrogen balance, right? It means more protein coming in than protein going out. Remember how I talked about like positive energy balance versus negative energy balance? That's how we lose weight or gain weight. Same thing here. You lose protein or gain protein by eating too little or too much, right? So the recommended amount for a sedentary individual is going to be 0.8 per kilogram, but the factors that up your protein intake are being more physically active, or obviously your body weight, you're multiplying it by your body weight. So that number also goes up. So this is another number that you'll sometimes see that you need to have memorized. The recommended protein intake based on weight is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So those are some of the factors that affect it. Also, if you're getting like really low quality protein, you probably need to go a little higher. But then again, it's like at that point, it's like, well, we should talk about other stuff. If your protein quality is so low that you need to up your protein intake, then the rest of your diet's probably pretty effed anyways. So I never really consider that even. So factors that affect your protein, your desire to gain weight or lose weight, your carbohydrate availability. If you don't have enough carbohydrates, you can always eat a lot more protein, and then that can, get converted into carbs. It's hard on your kidneys and hard on your liver, but you can do it. Your exercise intensity. If you're working intensely, then you're creating more protein damage. If you're working gently, maybe not so much. And then like your training and your fitness level. Early on, you'll actually want to really go crazy on the protein with like new clients because their body is going to get so damaged because they've never worked out before. So you might give them a little extra protein in the beginning so that their body can be like, oh, and then it can kind of get used to that. And then the quality, again, low quality protein, probably going to need more protein intake, right? Age is another one. Young individuals will need more protein. They are also, because you got to remember, they're growing their body. So teens will generally need more protein compared with their body weight. So we treat them kind of similar to athletes in a lot of ways. And one thing to be a note of, more protein doesn't result in more muscle mass. That's one thing we got to remember. Your total calories should not exceed 35% protein. If it does, this can actually hamper your health and your performance because chances are you didn't have enough room for vitamins and minerals in your diet. So that's already not good. Your kidneys are going to have to process all that extra. If you don't have kidney problems, it's probably going to be fine. But if you do have that, it can be problematic. Turning that amino acid into glucose takes a lot of water. So it can dehydrate your client. It can dehydrate you. So that's not so great. That puts more stress on your kidneys, by the way. It is associated with cardiovascular disease and certain types of cancers. I only say that because animal sources of protein, which are really rich in protein, are typically very high in saturated fats, which again, saturated fat has the LDL cholesterol and doesn't have a lot of omega cholesterols in them. And then it can even excrete calcium, weirdly enough, because also there's a lot of sodium that we usually put on meats. I mean, usually we salt meats, right? We make them more savory. That salting process, again, raises your blood pressure. Lots of sodium. And then sodium and calcium really like each other. So it kind of pulls it out of your blood and then pulls it out of your bones, which, can sometimes lead to low bone density, even though somebody's on a high protein diet. And they're like, what the heck? I thought protein, my bones are made of protein. They are, but your bones are also made of calcium. That's a sneaky one. So good sources. Grains will have some, like brown rice, pastas, whole grains in particular will have some protein in them. Fruits and vegetables, usually not so much. Some fruits, fruits are usually really low in protein, but some vegetables are a little higher in protein. Like peas, for instance, I guess they're a legume. Dairy is a really rich source of protein, but remember, it is also a rich source of saturated fat. So again, if you're on a super high protein diet and you're already getting a lot of saturated fat as well, that can become problematic. And then meats, right? Animal products are definitely going to be full of protein. Meats, fish, poultry, eggs, but you don't have to. You can always go with like the vegan, vegetarian options. Beans, like legumes, nuts, seeds, those are all also very good sources. Now, in terms of protein supplements, do you have to take one? No, I haven't taken a protein shake in, well, that's not true. I get them sometimes when I know I can't get something to eat soon. But I haven't bought protein for my house in a while because I tend to get enough protein just in my diet, right? So protein supplements will tell you that it will increase your muscle building capability because you'll have like more protein. But again, I go back to the same analogy I always say, which is like, having an excessive amount of protein doesn't always result in an excessive amount of muscle gain, right? They're kind of the same. If you deliver more lumber, but you still only have 4 guys working, they can't work any faster, right? So it just sits around and gets converted into something else. They might, burn it up for a fireplace. You'll hear people say that it increases your muscle building capability, which is not necessarily true. Now, I will say, protein shakes have been shown to be very positive because a lot of people don't get enough protein in their diet, and it is highly digestible. So it enters your bloodstream very quickly. So if you are on a low protein diet and all of a sudden you introduce like a protein shake, it can have really positive effects. So do I dislike protein shakes? No, I don't. But if you want to spend money, if you don't want to spend money on them, you can just make sure you get a high quality protein in your regular diet. Now, just be careful with when you are picking out protein supplements. Just be careful of certain chemicals and additives that are going to be found in there. Your best source of protein is a low ingredient whey protein powder. One of them that I really like is Naked Whey. It is not that great tasting compared with other ones, but it's also not terrible. But this is a pretty darn good source. Looks expensive, but this is a 5-pound bucket. That's a lot. How much does that come down to? That's a double scoop. Oh, that's not good. That is gonna be kind of expensive. So there's 76 servings per container. That's coming out to like $1.20 per serving. That's actually, never mind. Take it back. That's not bad. But it doesn't have any artificial sweeteners in it, which again, I will talk about those tomorrow. I know everybody's been waiting for me to talk about that. So it doesn't have any of that. They've tested it for heavy metals to make sure that there's no heavy metals in there, which is really nice because those are not nutrients. It's relatively low in calories. And if you look at the ingredients, it says whey protein concentrate. So it's literally just whey protein. Now, it doesn't taste like much. So it's not the best tasting protein powder in the world. But if you are adding that to like, let's say a smoothie, lots of vitamins and minerals in there, hey, now you've got a very nutrient dense food as part of your diet. You're getting lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, and plenty of adequate protein. So just watch for your added ingredients. I'm not saying that's the only brand out there that you buy. And yeah, you can always add like peanut butter powder to it. If you got the PB2, yeah, it's actually not bad. And then it tastes pretty good. This sort of dried out peanut butter there. Just watch out. PB2 will be high in fat, which can slow things down a little bit. It'll leave you feeling full for long, that's for sure. So make sure you get sufficient protein in your diet if you are exercising. The harder you exercise, the more protein you're needing. But even then, there is still an upper limit to how much your body can process. You only got so many workers. Oh, really? Is it low in fat? I guess that makes sense. They took all the oils out of it. Really? Hold You're blowing my mind here, Freddie. No, sure enough, 1.5. That is really low. Hey, that's great. Yeah, it's a good choice. I like it. You schooled me on that one. I love it. Yeah, amino acid consumption, making sure. Now, there is some claims out there that will say like BCAAs before you exercise enhances your muscle building because those BCAAs get in there before your workout. They get absorbed really quickly, and then the protein building process happens like before you leave the gym, which is nice. I don't think there has been a lot of proof of that. But, you know, again, if you are low on protein in your diet and then you start taking an amino acid supplement, well, it makes sense that like it would be effective. So I get that. If you are on a low protein diet, if you're on like a diet to like lose weight, for instance, yes, maybe an amino acid supplement can be helpful. But general recommendations, 1 to 4 hours prior to training, make sure you get some protein and carbohydrates in there. Protein-rich foods can be good because then you can get your levels nice and boosted and you will not fall out of protein synthesis during your workout. Post-workout, try to get anywhere from, on average, 6 to 20 grams of essential amino acids, aka 6 to 20 grams of protein that is like relatively high quality. So you have all the amino acids. Try to get a complete protein source. You can definitely go higher than that. You know, we've seen as much as like 40 grams in certain supplements before. I think that's overdoing it a little bit. But the whole like it can't be absorbed thing isn't necessarily true either. It just means that it can't be processed quickly. Doesn't mean that 40 grams of protein is just going to come out the back end and not get used. It'll get into your body. It's just your body's not going to be able to work that any faster on 40 grams than it would at whatever the upper limit is. So super essential. You got 20 different amino acids. You want to make sure you get plenty of them. Protein supplements can be a decent source, although I don't think that they are always necessary. But you do want to make sure no matter what type of protein you're getting, it is at least high quality and doesn't have any crazy additives to it. Whew, 85 slides today, guys, and y'all survived. How y'all feeling?
Feeling
Good.
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 Good. Hopefully you're not asleep.
Good.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But hopefully nothing. I mean, honestly, it shouldn't be too new. You know, it all kind of pairs together. Now, like I said, a lot of that. The reason I printed those slides out for you guys, if you didn't have a nutrition textbook, the information found in those slides really makes up for it. Not if you don't have a nutrition textbook, and those slides make up for it really, really well. It's basically like a crash course on the most important ways to look at all that. Those of you who haven't gotten those slides from me, by the way, remind me when we meet up next week. Remind me on, was it Tuesday? Yeah, Tuesday to
Tuesday.
get you that copy. So that'll be really helpful. All right, guys, I'll kill the recording and let y'all